In a land where power was absolute and the fate of nations hung on the whims of a king, a young woman rose from obscurity to royalty. She was not born into nobility, nor did she seek the throne, yet she was chosen for such a time as this. This is the story of Esther, a woman of faith, courage, and destiny. The palace of King Xerxes was a place of grandeur, golden walls, marble floors, and silk banners that danced in the warm breeze. The king was the most powerful man on earth, and his word was law. One evening he held a feast, a celebration of wealth and power that lasted 180 days. Wine flowed freely. Laughter filled the halls. The king, pleased with his glory, gave an order. "Summon Queen Vashti. Let her come and display her beauty before my guests." But Vashti refused. The room fell silent. No one defied the king. And so, in his anger, Xerxes removed Vashti as queen, banishing her from his presence forever. But with the queen gone, the empire needed a new ruler by the king's side, and so a search began. In the city of Susa, a young Jewish girl named Hadassah lived with her cousin, Mordecai. She had been orphaned as a child, and Mordecai had raised her as his own daughter. Hadassah was beautiful, graceful in manner, wise beyond her years. But she was also humble, unaware that destiny had marked her for greatness. To the Persians, she was known by her Persian name, Esther. One day, a decree was sent throughout the empire. All the young maidens of the land were to be brought to the palace, where the king would choose his new queen. Esther was taken. She left behind the life she knew, her people, her cousin Mordecai, and stepped into the unknown. For a full year she was prepared, bathed in perfumes, dressed in silks, adorned with the finest jewels. She was taught the customs of the royal court, the ways of a queen, and though she listened and learned, she kept one secret, her identity as a Jew. The time had come. After months of preparation, the young women of the kingdom were ready to be presented before King Xerxes. They arrived one by one, each adorned in the finest silks, their bodies perfumed with oils of myrrh and frankincense, their faces painted with the delicate strokes of palace artists. The air was thick with anticipation. Each girl entered the grand throne room with hope, and left either with disappointment or indifference from the king. Some held their heads high, others lowered their gazes, fearing their fate if they failed to impress him. But none captured his heart. Then Esther stepped forward. She did not wear the heaviest gold jewelry. She did not drape herself in the brightest colors, and yet she was radiant. Her beauty was not just in her form, it was in her presence, her grace, her quiet confidence. "Who is this woman?" Xerxes asked, intrigued. The courtiers whispered. The nobles leaned forward. There was something about her, something beyond physical beauty, beyond charm, a presence that commanded without effort. Xerxes, leaning closer and fascinated, "Come closer," he said. Esther moved forward, her heart pounding. She had been taught how to bow, how to speak in the courtly tongue, but in this moment all she could hear was the rush of blood in her ears. She lowered herself before the king, waiting. Xerxes, soft, intrigued, almost in awe, asked, "What is your name?" Esther, soft, but steady, said, "Esther, my king." There was no boastfulness in her voice, no desperation, no flattery, just a quiet strength. The king studied her, then turned to his advisors. Xerxes declared, "She is the one." Gasps filled the court. servants hurried to fetch the royal crown. The other women who had spent months vying for the king's favor watched in silence as the golden circlet was placed upon Esther's head. And so, the orphan girl from a foreign people became Queen of Persia. The palace of Susa was vast, filled with endless corridors, hidden chambers, and whispered schemes. And in the shadows, a man plotted. Haman, the king's highest advisor, was powerful, wealthy, and utterly ruthless. He had everything except the respect of one man. Mordecai, Esther's cousin, was a Jew, a man of principle who served at the palace gates. Day after day he watched as Haman passed by, but unlike the others, he did not bow. Haman, furious, gritting his teeth, asked, "He dares to defy me?" The hatred in his heart festered. It was not enough to punish Mordecai alone. No, he wanted more. He wanted to rid the entire empire of these people, and so he devised a plan. Haman, slick, persuasive, addressing the king, "My king, there is a people among us who do not obey your laws. They keep themselves separate, their customs strange. They are a danger to your rule. If it pleases you, let a decree be written that they should be destroyed." King Xerxes, trusting his most loyal advisor, nodded. Xerxes dismissing the matter. "Do as you see fit." Haman's lips curled into a victorious smile. He took the king's seal and wrote the decree. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, every Jew, man, woman, and child was to be slaughtered. No mercy, no exceptions. The order spread like wildfire. From city to city, town to town, the people read the decree with growing horror. When Mordecai saw the edict, he tore his garments and fell to the ground in grief. He wept openly in the streets, wailing in anguish. The people of Israel fasted, prayed, and cried out for deliverance. Mordecai, voice breaking, urgent, said, "Send word to Esther. Tell her she must go before the king and plead for our lives." But Esther, hearing Mordecai's plea, hesitated. She had never gone before the king uninvited. To do so was to risk death, unless the king extended his golden scepter to her. Esther, uncertain and fearful, replied, "I have not been summoned in 30 days. If I go to him without his request, I could die." But Mordecai, firm, prophetic, said, "Do not think you will escape, Esther. If you remain silent, deliverance will come from another place. But perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Esther took a deep breath and made her decision. She said, "Gather all the Jews in Susa. Fast for me, 3 days, no food, no water. My maids and I will do the same. Then I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish." Esther was no longer just a queen. She was a woman on a mission, a warrior without a sword. The fate of her people rested on her shoulders, and with each passing hour, the time of reckoning drew closer. The palace was quiet. The golden halls, usually alive with the chatter of servants and nobles, now felt heavy with an unspoken weight. Somewhere deep in the heart of the king's court, Queen Esther prepared herself for what could be her final act. She had spent 3 days in fasting and prayer. No food had touched her lips. No water had soothed her thirst. The hunger in her body was nothing compared to the storm in her heart. But now, there was no room for fear, only faith. She whispered to herself, "If I perish, I perish." With steady hands, she draped herself in royal garments, the deep blue of Persian royalty shimmering like the midnight sky. She placed the crown upon her head and straightened her back. She was not merely a girl anymore. She was a queen, and she was ready, The doors of the throne room loomed before her, guarded by soldiers who knew the law well. No one, not even the queen, could approach the king without being summoned. The penalty was death, unless he extended his golden scepter. The massive doors creaked open and she stepped inside. The air in the throne room was thick with tension. The nobles and courtiers who lined the walls gasped as they saw her. Whispers rose like a gathering storm. One courtier whispered in shock, "The queen, she was not summoned." All eyes turned to the grand throne, where King Xerxes sat in deep contemplation. At his right hand stood Haman, his ever-loyal advisor, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. The room held its breath. Esther did not bow. She did not tremble. She simply waited. The king shifted in his throne, the faint rustling of his robes breaking the silence. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. The law was clear. If the king did not acknowledge her, the guards would strike her down where she stood. Every heartbeat stretched into eternity. Then, he moved. King Xerxes raised his golden scepter and extended it toward Esther. The tension broke as a collective exhale swept through the court. The king's voice was gentle yet intrigued. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it shall be given to you." She had done it. She had survived. But this was only the beginning. She spoke with calm grace. "My king, if it pleases you, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared." Xerxes raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Very well, we shall come." Haman, standing tall beside the king, smirked. A private banquet with the queen? A great honor indeed. His chest swelled with pride, not knowing that the very invitation he so gladly accepted would be his downfall. The banquet was lavish, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats, sweet wine, and exotic spices. Golden goblets shimmered under the flickering candlelight, and silken drapes cascaded from the high ceilings. Esther, seated gracefully beside King Xerxes, remained composed, though her heart pounded beneath her royal robes. Haman, seated opposite the king, was still basking in his own pride. He had been invited to a private feast with the king and queen, not once, but twice. He believed himself untouchable, the most favored in the kingdom. Xerxes, sipping his wine, turned to his queen. "Now, Esther, you have prepared this feast for us. Tell me, what is your request? Even up to half my kingdom, and it shall be granted." Esther took a deep breath. The moment had come. She had prayed, she had fasted, and now she had to speak. With measured grace, she rose from her seat and met the king's eyes. "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my request, and the lives of my people. This is my petition." The king's brow furrowed. A hush fell over the room. "Your life? Your people? What do you mean, Esther?" She stood firm, her voice unwavering. "For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I would have remained silent. But this is a plot of death." Xerxes' face darkened. "Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do this?" Esther turned her gaze across the table and pointed. "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." The silence in the room shattered like glass. Haman's face drained of color. He gasped, eyes darting from the queen to the king. Xerxes, his fury ignited, slammed his goblet onto the table and rose to his feet. Rage clouded his expression as he stormed out into the palace gardens, struggling to contain his anger. Haman, now trembling, threw himself at Esther's feet, begging for his life. "Please, "My queen, I did not know. Have mercy." Just then Xerxes returned, and what he saw sealed Haman's fate. Haman had fallen upon the couch where Esther was reclining. The king's fury erupted. "Will he even assault the queen while she is with me in my house?" At his words, the guards moved swiftly. A veil was thrown over Haman's face, a sign that his fate was sealed. One of the king's attendants stepped forward. "Your Majesty, there is a gallows, 50 cubits high, that Haman built for Mordecai, who once saved your life." Xerxes' eyes burned with finality. Hang him on it. And so the very trap Haman had set for another became his own undoing. Peace was restored. The decree of destruction was overturned. The people of Israel were saved. And Queen Esther, once an orphan, once a girl hidden in the shadows, had become the deliverer of her people, her name forever written in the scrolls of history.